Hi guys, I hope that you're having a good day whenever you are watching this. And I hope you guys are ready for some content on economic alliances. So today we'll be covering what they are, how they're used, the challenges that come with economic alliances, the positives that come with economic alliances, how they're regulated, and then a few like case studies in terms of application on examples of when they're used. Um, yeah. If you guys have any questions about anything that I'm going to be talking about today, please feel free to send me a message and ask. Okay, so let's get started. Firstly, we need to be looking at what economic alliances are. Um, and to put it briefly, what they are agreements between different countries and regions in order to cooperate their policies and things like that on different economic aspects. Specifically, when it comes to economic alliances, we're looking at things like trade mainly, and we're trying to like promote integration through this. Um, the main aims of countries forming economic alliances are to try and increase economic growth within their own country, um, to again increase trade, and then to foster closer relationships between the different countries and the different member countries. When looking at trade, when looking at economic alliances, many of these countries are just using different types of methods of collaboration in order to in order for these things to function. So these can be trade agreements, common markets, customs unions, and other types of things. Okay, so let's now look at right. So we're going to be looking at these types, the different types of economic alliances that I previously mentioned, like a few seconds ago on the previous slide. So firstly, we have trade agreements. Now, what trade agreements are, they're referring to specifically the rules and the regulations that the different member countries come to into the different member countries of an economic alliance come to, in terms of mainly international trade, but it's not limited to that. Um, so this is the ways that they regulate trade between the countries and then sometimes through to other countries, but that's more a little bit later in the common markets and the customs unions. So, when looking at the trade agreements, what usually happens is countries within the economic alliances reduce or they try to eliminate specific trade barriers that occur. And by eliminating the trade barriers, what happens is countries are able to export and import goods between the member countries more easily. So, the first one that we look at when we're looking at trade agreements is import tariffs. So in general, import tariffs are obviously like the duties and the taxes that a country would impose on products that come into their country. So this is obviously a like physical amount in terms of either a percentage uh, increase in depending on the product itself, like the price of the product, or it may be like just a benchmark, like 100 Rand for a specific product. So when looking at import tariffs, there's two different types of tariffs, one being protective tariffs and the other one being revenue tariffs. So protective tariffs are the tariffs that are put in place to protect smaller businesses within a country from having to compete with the prices that other countries may be able to provide the same product for. And then when we're looking at revenue tariffs, these are kind of put in place specifically looking at government funding and a way to ensure that the government are able to make some type of revenue from exports from imports of products within into a country. So hence, reducing or like limiting or eliminating import tariffs between like the countries, member countries of an economic alliance, what that what that essentially means is that it's then easier to trade because now other countries are now not having to pay like extra prices in order to import their goods, right? So then The second one is import quotas. So this is the restrictions on the quantity of imports into a country. So whereas tariffs look at specific prices and like an increase in price that a supplier would have to pay, import quotas, on the other hand, they look specifically at the quantity of a specific good that is allowed to come into the country. And it's a mechanism, it's a form of like direct intervention because it's able to stop it immediately at a certain point. So in the same way that reducing or eliminating import tariffs make it easier to trade, in the same way import quotas do the same thing, because now member countries aren't limited to the amount of goods or services that they then trade with other member countries. Then the last type of trade agreement that is usually looked at is exchange controls. So exchange controls in and of themselves are the amount of exchange or like foreign currencies available to purchase exports within a country. So by limiting the amount of foreign exchange that citizens within the country have access to, you're then also limiting the flows of the goods. So, for example, if um, South Africa was concerned with the amount of imports that is being brought into the country by from like Europe, what they then do is they limit the amount of euros that South African citizens are allowed to have access to. Or what they could do is they can limit who is able to acquire these the currency, in the sense that they could restrict them to people that are going on holidays. They could restrict them to specific businesses or things like that. So by doing this, again, by removing exchange controls, what ends up happening is there's the like movement of trade, and um, it's a lot easier for member countries to trade with one another. So these are like the three main types of trade agreements. There are like a few others in terms of like um, preferential treatment when dealing with trade um, with other member countries, and then also like trade promotion can occur within countries, but those aren't really like big types of trade agreements. So then the second type of economic alliances, or the mechanisms of economic alliances, are common markets. So common markets, they are a way to like improve the economic integration between member countries. And what it essentially does is it allows free movement of goods, services, labor, capital, um, between all the member countries. So what usually happens is they'd establish a unified market where um, they are regulated on the same standards, um, and so that there's like a good flow of goods and services between the countries, and that means that it would in general be improved. So an example of this would be like the European Union and like the markets that they have there. It's a lot easier for um, labor and capital to to like move through them, um, and in general there's more mobility of it. So this specifically focuses on the integration between the member countries of economic alliances. And then here the last one is customs unions. So this is when countries establish a common external tariff, or they use the economic alliance as a way to establish import duties and trade policies for importers outside their own union. What this essentially means is that they have like unified external trade policy um, for any other country that is outside their union. So they kind of exist as a single entity when they're negotiating trade agreements with other countries. Um, so so what ends up happening is it's a lot easier for them to remain as a united front and make those negotiations in that way. Okay, now let us move on to Okay, moving on. I don't know if I got cut off. I really hope that I did not get cut off. Anyways, um, we're moving on to specifically the benefits of economic alliances. So these are the four main types of the four like main benefits. Obviously, they may be other ones, but these are the main ones. So firstly, we have the idea of stimulating economic growth. Now, there's three different reasons for this. Firstly, because of these member countries integrating their economies in this way, markets within a country are expanded for businesses to operate into. This also means that businesses and suppliers in one specific country have more access to and easier access to factors of production in other countries. And as a result of this, there is an increase in production in general. And now when we're measuring like the the growth of an economy, production is taken into account. So being able to produce more leads to economic growth within a country. Um, then secondly, we're looking at an increase in trade in general. This is something obvious, like that is obviously going to occur, and I've mentioned it a few times in the previous slide. Um, so with an increase in trade, there's then an increase in the exports of a country, and it means that suppliers and businesses in one of the member countries can then sell to a wider customer base in other countries. So because of this, there's going to be, in general, an increase in demand for the goods and services produced by any business in one of the member countries. And as a result, to meet the demands um, of consumers, the suppliers and the companies of the suppliers and companies and the people that produce goods and services are going to increase production. And then again, linking back to economic growth, an increase in production is good for a country's economic growth. Then, furthermore, into this, what can then occur is specialization can occur within member countries, which means that countries are going to look at the products and services that they supply, that they have a comparative advantage with um, in comparison to the other countries and the other members of the economic alliances, which means that as a whole, the production that occurs within a country is going to be more efficient because you're only producing what you're specialized to produce, what you're able to produce very well, and then you are importing um, the things that you don't necessarily make or don't efficiently make. So in general, there's a lot of efficiency in this way of trading. And then lastly here, we're looking at foreign investment and how economic alliances attract foreign investment, especially because of the integration between the economies. So when there's more foreign investment, what ends up happening is there's going to be more injections into the economy. When I'm talking about injections, I mean money is going to be entering uh, the circular flow within a specific country's economy. Um, yeah, so there's more circulation of money within that country um, because of uh, because of foreign investment into the country. Then secondly, looking at price stability. So firstly, um, looking here, there is increased competition in the market. So what happens is with the increase in trade and the expanded market, as I previously mentioned, there's going to be more competition between suppliers, firstly, but secondly, there's going to be an increase in supply in general because there are um, more businesses and more suppliers supplying these goods and services. So when we have an increase in supply, um, there when we have an increase in supply, the resultant of this is a decrease in price. So this means that consumers in general pay a lower price for goods and services that they usually would pay a higher price for because of these economic alliances. And then secondly, looking at their um, access to goods and services. Here again, they have more choices, they have like a wider supply range. And because of this, as well as the increase in competition between suppliers, prices tend to drop in order for suppliers to try and get like a lower price in order for their product or their service to be the one that is picked by consumers. Then thirdly, we're looking at political stability between the countries of the economic alliance. So the economic alliance is obviously going to encourage cooperation and collaboration between these member countries. Um, and by entering into an economic alliance, there's a sense of fostering trust and understanding between these member countries, which therefore looks like the likelihood of conflicts between them decreasing. Um, Furthermore, because they're entered into economic alliances together, they have regular diplomatic negotiations, um, which means that they're able to address any types of disputes or conflicts that occur in a peaceful way by people who are trained to do so. And then lastly, here we see the idea of job creation. So this just links to the demand for labor increase, the demand for labor increasing. So with the new markets, there's going to be an increase in demand for the goods and services, as I mentioned a lot earlier. Um, and in order to meet this, the production needs to increase to meet this demand, right? So what then happens is they now need to be an increase in labor in general. So so there will be an increase in demand for labor and more job creation, more job opportunities because more workers and more laborers are now needed. Um, and then with the idea of like foreign investment coming in, you see new industries occurring in member countries that may have not previously been there. And once again, here there's the opportunity for new jobs. So these are the four main benefits of economic alliances: stimulating economic growth, price stability, political stability, and job creation. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to move on to some of the disadvantages of economic alliances, or rather, like more the challenges of them. So, firstly, we have this idea of challenges in competing with other member countries. And this usually happens obviously between the countries in an economic alliance. So, what ends up happening is you have economic alliances where some of these countries have developed more than other countries, or their economies are doing a lot better than other countries. Um, so less developed countries have challenges in competing or remaining on the same level of the more advanced economies of the other member countries. And what ends up happening is you see economic disparities coming through, and as a result, some member countries end up gaining more than others. Um, if we think of like a real life example here in terms of like BRICS, the economy of South Africa is very different to that of like China or even like India for that matter, in the sense that those countries, their economic growth is something that is a bit more stable, considering they have more people to, um, they have more laborers and they have like more factors of production. So in that sense, South Africa is then made to compete with other countries that have a much more advanced economy in comparison to us. Okay, so then the second idea here, or the second challenges or disadvantages of an economic alliance is the loss of sovereignty, right? So because decisions can sometimes or most times be made collectively, these decisions aren't necessarily like they cannot be made independently. So countries have to be able to make a trade-off with their sovereignty in order to make decisions collectively, especially when looking at um, the customs unions that they form, because they're now operating as kind of like a single entity. And so as a whole, they they're trading off their sovereignty in order to be part of this economic alliance, and there's just loss of national control as a whole. Then, thirdly, we look at the dependency on other members. So, some countries depend too much on goods and services from other countries, and there's just a risk of disruptions in the supply chain that comes with it. When looking at this, um, essentially what it means is some member countries end up becoming dependent on the imports or the ability to export their own goods and services into one of the other member countries. And this is something that is not good, because when something negative happens or something disrupts the ability for other member countries to supply the country with the goods or service, um, it ends up having like a knock-on effect within their own country. Um, an example of this would be the fact that South Africa are part of BRICS, and in Russia they produce like a lot of sunflower seeds, um, and a and as a result they produce like sunflower oil. Um, I don't know all the name brands of sunflower of the oils, but they produce oil, and through the like war between Russia and Ukraine and the decrease in like exports and things like that, um, South Africa used to be very dependent on Russia for the import of the oil, of the sunflower seeds if they aren't already like made into the product. And currently in South Africa, the prices of like oil, cooking oil, has increased quite a lot because they do not have the same supply of the sunflower oil and of the sunflower seeds as they previously did. So this is just then like looking at the dependency on other members. And then the last idea here is trade disputes. So this is like between the member countries. So differences in trade policies, regulations, or just the interpretations of trade agreements can lead to disputes among um, member countries. Furthermore, it also takes like quite a lot of time to resolve. And this is something that's like the resultant of other things. So if there could be political changes in specific member countries, and the leadership may change, this comes with change in ideologies for the countries, and it affects the economic direction that a country may want to go into, right? So in that sense, um, they may come to like different um, they have different aims for the use of the economic alliances. So when this happens, like it affects the direction that the economic alliances in general would want to like go into. So there can be differences surfacing in terms of the trade policies, how they want to regulate them, um, and how they want to interpret them. Um, So these are like the main disadvantages of economic alliances. Obviously, there's other things in terms of like different member countries having different interests, having different priorities, um, in terms of what they think is important, what they want to achieve, in terms of things like external pressure. But these are just the main four. Okay, then lastly, we're just looking at the regulation of economic alliances before we go into some of the case studies and some of the examples. So, the World Trade Organization are the people that are in charge of regulating and controlling economic alliances in general. So, there's different methods that they have in order to do this, right? So, firstly, they do dispute resolution. So it's a place, a platform for different member countries to go to and resolve any of the issues that could have risen between them, right? So so in terms of like the disadvantages that I spoke about just now, trade disputes can occur between like different member countries, and it's important for them to have a space in which they can go to solve these disputes, right? And so the World Trade Organization offers like a structured way to um, resolve these conflicts, and they're also an organization that should be remaining impartial. So they're able to regulate economic alliances in this way. Secondly, um, they're one of the other ways of regulating economic alliances looking at like discrimination between member countries and other countries, in the sense that they're ensuring that countries treat all trade partners the same. So they try to stop preferential treatment between member countries and make sure that like the standards and regulations are the same as other countries in the world. So this is a way to stop discrimination between different countries that are outside of the member countries, or even different countries that are in within like the economic alliance itself. Um, Thirdly, they're regulated through um, their like principles of like transparency and how they monitor the countries, right? So in general, the World Trade Organization watches what the different countries are doing, and they try to encourage openness between the countries, between the member countries, and then also between the WTO and the member countries themselves. So it's making sure that all of these alliances, all of the economic alliances, are following the regulations and the rules that the WTO have put forward, right? So it also means that they allow one member country to have access to the information and the policies and the ways that other countries regulate trade, which also again promotes like this idea of transparency, of like honesty, and of just ensuring that everyone is like abiding by the rules that they have set out.